Some massive Nintendo Switch 2 news just appeared because we have now official confirmation that the Nintendo Switch 2 is indeed the fastest selling video game console device ever in history, as Nintendo has officially revealed the launch weekend numbers for this hardware. And let me tell you, it blows quite literally everything else out of the water. So I want to dive into that briefly with you all. Then we have the massive confirmation that Nintendo just revealed a first-party Nintendo Switch 2 game that we don't have too much info on. To be fair, we don't have a release time window or anything like that, but this is a big and unfolding situation and has some people talking about the likelihood of directs taking place or not in the month of June in light of this announcement. And it's actually really exciting for the precedent that it sets for potentially how Nintendo goes about promoting some upcoming games within a series when there's a popular one on Switch 1 that maybe they want to go back and add in a free update to, because we actually now have an additional free notable performance update for a big Switch 1 game. And from there, we have an update to the Hollow Knight SilkSong release window. And listen, with this game, I'll believe it when I see it at this point, but a PR manager has confirmed a window nonetheless. And we did get a little bit of an update on this game at the Xbox Game Showcase. We also have Final Fantasy VII Remake now targeting a specific window, and a Koei Tecmo producer has weighed in on the Nintendo Switch 2 power level conversation, and I find the headline on this one interesting and something I want to visit with you all briefly due to the ongoing debate that's been out there around the Switch 2's power level. But we'll get on the same page with all of this info. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. Well, if you were of the mindset that the Nintendo Switch 2 was going to flop, there was a huge negative reaction to it online, and nobody was excited about going and getting this console. I don't think that that's actually what translated in real life, in real time. And I was definitely saying in videos like these lines you saw at retailers everywhere, and the level of stock that we saw Nintendo show up with for a day one launch console was probably positioning this console to go down as the fastest ever selling in video game history. And now we have official confirmation of that. As you can see, Nintendo of America's direct tweet, which says Nintendo Switch 2 has sold over 3.5 million units worldwide in its first 4 days, becoming the fastest selling Nintendo hardware ever globally. Now, in comparison, in case you kind of want to know the initial launch window numbers of PS5, PS4, which were the prior record holders for the fastest consoles ever, and those totaled in right about 4.5 million over the first 2 months. So clearly Nintendo's ahead of pace of that. And then the 24-hour scale, a little bit different since we don't have those exact numbers from Nintendo, but PS4 was the record holder at around 1 million units worldwide in a 24-hour period. So fastest ever sales weekend now goes to Nintendo for sure, and they're even tracking out to beat the 2-month sales totals of the prior console record holders in PS5 and PS4 in just 4 days at 3.5 million officially shifted in 4 days on the market. So yes, quite the success for Nintendo, quite the follow-up to a very successful Nintendo Switch console generation, and lots of people waiting to get this thing day one. As I mentioned, a very still active and committed Nintendo fan base of 150 million plus install base waiting and ready to upgrade to Switch 2, and Nintendo just so happened to show up with truckloads and truckloads of production this time around to actually come close to meeting a lot of consumer demand for this product. They are still clearly hard to find, and there are sellouts pretty much everywhere, but I do think you can maybe walk into a retailer or two somewhere in a really small town and find a handful of consoles. But for the most part, we have had comments recently from Doug Bowser, which states that Nintendo believes they're going to be able to meet consumer demand through the rest of this year and even including the holiday season. And while, of course, that doesn't mean there won't be sellouts, it just means Nintendo really ramped up production for this console. And now we are seeing kind of the benefits of them doing that, with also having a large install base that was ready for a new console after 8 years of playing on our current Nintendo Switches. So 4 days, 3.5 million units sold officially in the books for Nintendo Switch 2. Kudos to Nintendo making history out there with a follow-up console that is extremely successful. I think the fear of this thing being another Wii U flop can probably go to bed at this point, because while you can't argue only the core Nintendo fans are going out there and buying it right now, 3.5 million in units in 4 days is a very good start, very good momentum. literally, talk in comparison to like selling a whole generation at 13 million units like the Wii U did. We are not in failure territory for this thing, but rather, the big question is going to be is, can it even live up to 100 million lifetime sales and go into that territory of it being a massive smash hit success once again. But so much for the hate train and boycott Nintendo trends online, right? And I want to next hop right over to VGC, where you can see the following article, which outlines Splatoon Raiders revealed for Nintendo Switch 2, the first Splatoon spin-off revealed alongside a Splatoon 3 update. And you have here Splatoon Raiders was teased on the Nintendo Today app on Tuesday, with more details coming soon. In the role of a mechanic, players will go on an adventure in the mysterious Spiralite Islands alongside the Splat-tacular Deep Cut Trio. That name actually has some significance that we kind of knew about this project ahead of time, and we'll dive into that in a minute. The title was teased alongside a new Nintendo Switch 2 patch for Splatoon 3, which will be released this week on June 12th. The update will add more detailed visuals, a smoother appearance according to Nintendo, in addition to new weapons as part of the Splat Islands or Splatland, collection. Based on previous weapons, these new additions have fresh looks with different sub and special weapons, Nintendo said. There are a total of 30 new weapon kits in this collection, a returning stage from the original Splatoon game. Urchin Underpass will also be added, plus all weapons freshness caps will be raised, and new in-game badges will be added. Finally, Nintendo said a new stat will be added for Anarchy Battle called Series Weapon Power, which will track a player's effectiveness per weapon based on their win/loss ratio in battles, and will then match them with players of similar power. This makes it possible for players to try new weapons without being disadvantaged and push the limits of their favorite weapons, it says. Okay. So let's unpack this, because there's actually a few different things I want to highlight here. One of which we did know about a codenamed by the name of Spiral, which was claimed to be the next Splatoon in development. This is back from the Midori codename leaks days. So very interesting, not to mention the fact we have Nash Weedle also teasing that there would be some kind of Nintendo Today Switch game announcement, and maybe a couple more to come. So there's actually going to be some reason to dive into a separate leaks and rumors video that I will make on the channel either during this week or in the upcoming weekend. But there's a lot to pay attention to now with the history of the things that Nash Weedle has gotten right, and even some of these codename games that we need to revisit. But this is a pretty cool one. So from the sounds of things, because it's being advertised as a Splatoon spin-off, it very much seems to be like kind of one of those standalone campaign type of experiences, but probably at a broader scale. Like Splatoon 3 had that salmon run or something to that effect, where you kind of had something of a single player mode you could go through, and it was its own adventure separate from the main multiplayer experience of Splatoon. And on the surface, while we don't have all the details, it does kind of seem like this is going to be some kind of campaign experience, but as a standalone game in the Splatoon franchise. And there was some wording around Nintendo saying the first Splatoon spin-off, which may be insinuating that they have some others plan to come in the future. But what is most interesting to me about this, and some of this does tie into the idea of whether or not we're having a Nintendo Direct, which I will highlight in a moment, because spoiler, I do think that is still coming, but there's some talk about it maybe not happening online. You have to remember this free updates for select Nintendo Switch games page that we saw around the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2, which outlined all the games that Nintendo was just giving us free noticeable upgrades for. Scarlet and Violet being on this list, very welcome additions. Well, look at this. Splatoon 3 is just slotted into this webpage seamlessly, and you might remember we had a conversation about whether or not Nintendo would continue to add games to this free updates list as time has gone on into the Switch 2's generation. We now have the confirmation that is what they are going to do. So just with Splatoon, for example, visuals optimized for Nintendo Switch 2 display and high resolution TVs for improved image quality, frame rate optimized for Switch 2 for smoother movement in the plaza and Grand Festival grounds. Now, we don't have specific resolution callouts or anything like that as part of this update, but I do think this sets a really interesting precedent that when a title of significance comes out related to a franchise, Nintendo is kind of sending this message that we may also, at a similar time to help promote this new game, go back and update the most recent installment in the franchise, or just something that fans want to see updated for a game from the past, and make it run noticeably better on the Switch 2, because this is actually the type of performance patch that will make this game look, run, and feel better, not just something that is kind of loosely taking advantage of the new hardware. Like we're seeing backwards compatibility actually run some of these Switch 1 games better even without patches or updates. No, this one, there's actually work being put into it to make it take advantage of the Switch 2's hardware, which again just sends a really good message in terms of what maybe we can expect with the rest of the Switch 1 back catalog, because, you know, I'm pulling for games like Mario Wonder, Metroid Dread, some of the other prior Pokemon games, you know, maybe Luigi's Mansion 3, like a bunch of different classics from the Switch 1 generation. If they just continue to get free updates pushed for the Switch 2 version, that's obviously great for us gamers at the end of the day. So I thought that was a pretty cool thing. And then to kind of dovetail this into the conversation on the likelihood of a Nintendo Direct, because this is something that's being debated online right now, I really don't think this changes much, unless if you forget, Nintendo is actually known to just sometimes tease these type of games standalone, even around an event. Like, that's not the first time it's happened. We saw like a shadow drop announcement of Kirby Dream Buffet, which of course is a smaller eShop game, but still Kirby's name attached to it. We don't actually know that this is going to get a physical release either with this new Splatoon spinoff. And, you know, it's something that they've done literally in the month that they are still going to hold a Direct, but we just get a surprise one-off game announcement by itself. Sometimes I just think that these things don't fit into their Direct for an initial reveal, and rather they like to reveal it in the Nintendo Today app in this case now, and on their social media platforms, but also want to go into more detail in something like a Direct. And the biggest reason that I think a Direct is still really likely, not tied to leaks or rumors or anything like that, is one, we have history on our side. June is historically a month that Nintendo will hold a presentation. Two, too much of their lineup that we have right now for the Switch 2 needs more information and needs it soon. And I think that we're going to see Nintendo show up and promote a lot of their games. Dragon Drive, we don't have a release date for. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, we don't have a release date for. And I just do not believe, especially with a game like Dragon Drive, which is supposed to be a summer title, you're not going to wait until something like a September Direct to reveal that and the Metroid Prime 4 launch date. I do think that Nintendo has enough different projects cooking that need more details revealed for them, and probably some last minute marketing push for Donkey Kong Bonanza in the month of June, that we still see one happen this month. I don't like this week as a likely candidate, but the last 2 weeks of June, which will be the 17th through the 19th or the 24th through the 26th, as the likely time slots for Nintendo to go and hold their own presentation. And because we're right at the launch of the Switch 2 generation, I think that they still have plenty of stuff coming, and that initial Direct that was for the console reveal is kind of separate from their regular scheduled Direct presentations. And mind you, we had a Switch 1 Direct the week before it in March, which was a different time slot, and Nintendo doesn't have to go in June, but I think it's highly likely that we get back to that June Direct cadence and a September Direct once again, of some capacity this year in 2025. So I'm still team June Direct all the way, in spite of this announcement. And again, it's not the first time Nintendo's just mysteriously dropped a title and then turned around, promoted another game that both of those things, like you would have said, made sense to have take place in a Direct, and they just separated them for whatever reason. So from here we have one of the most elusive games that has been in development, that have been questioned by gamers on whether or not it's still a real thing. We do believe it is still real. It will come out eventually. And you have here this headline that outlines Hollow Knight SilkSong is not tied to a console release. Publisher clarifies the game is expected to release before holiday 2025. And of course, during the reveal for the ROG Ally, Xbox president Sarah Bond mentioned SilkSong in a way that could have been interpreted to mean that it was a launch game for the system. The highly anticipated Hollow Knight SilkSong will be available at launch and in Game Pass when the Ally releases later this year, Bond said. To clarify on that situation, Matthew Griffin, who handles the marketing and publishing for SilkSong developer Team Cherry, took to the game's Discord server, as shared on its Reddit page, to make it clear that the game is not necessarily a ROG Ally launch title. I confirmed before holiday, Griffin said, of the game's release date. We are not tied to a console release. Okay, so we now know before the holiday season, SilkSong will be out according to their own team. Now, of course, we know that they have targeted different years and release times in the past, and those have not come to fruition. So there is nothing that I think is in hard writing or in set in stone that you're not going to be able to potentially, still delay this game again if they feel like it needs that. But I do think we're probably finally in the release year. We have multiple different ESRB ratings or ratings boards rather that have now, officially rated this game. We have different web pages for pre-orders that have been spotted and going up, and it does seem like they're finally in that final stretch area of the game's development. And now we have it being advertised as part of Xbox's new handheld. and that it will be there by the launch of that handheld, but not necessarily tied to it now, is what we know. So sometime later this year, before the holiday season, is when we should be able to expect to play SilkSong in our own hands on our own consoles, and I will definitely be picking this one up for my Switch 2. So we'll have to wait and stay tuned for when the official launch date is, but a little bit of an update on SilkSong nonetheless. Final Fantasy VII Remake is coming to Nintendo Switch 2 this winter. So you have this write-up from My Nintendo News, which says, if you've been wondering when the excellent Final Fantasy VII Remake Integrate will be arriving on Nintendo Switch 2, then ponder no more, as the official Final Fantasy account has said it will be joining the recently announced Xbox Series X and S version this winter. Square Enix is reportedly planning to bring the entire trilogy to both platforms. A release date for the third entry has yet to be announced, and, you know, winter could technically mean 2026, so this is not the same situation where it's for sure a holiday game, but I do think that winter time, you know, often means December, January, February, you know, maybe even early March, but I do think that that's kind of the timescale we're going to be looking at for Final Fantasy. I wouldn't be surprised if it's actually out as something like an early December title to just throw it on the store shelves and basically promote it right around the holiday season, where obviously a lot of people are going to be padding out their Switch 2 collection with software quite a bit in this upcoming year. So that's kind of what's making the most sense to me, and I think that that probably is what we will see them do. But winter 2025 and or early 2026 is when you should expect Final Fantasy VII Remake Integrate to launch on Switch 2, and it's one of the more visually pleasing games. I'm definitely excited to check it out. I actually own it on PS4, never played it to completion at all, and have not played or seen any spoilers for Rebirth, so it'll give me a reason to freshly experience this franchise, and hopefully we get the announcement of Rebirth and maybe even some updates on when the third title in this trilogy may come to market at some point over this upcoming year. But the last thing to close out with, and this is just kind of a fun one for the power level conversation of the Nintendo Switch 2, you have Koei Tecmo says Nintendo Switch 2 is closer to Xbox Series S than PS4. You probably remember a lot of debate with Digital Foundry. There's been a lot of debate about the power of this Nintendo Switch 2, with Digital Foundry stating that the system is closer in power to a PlayStation 4 than a Series S. However, in an interview with Koei Tecmo producer Hikuto Edegawa, if I'm saying that right, probably butchering it, stated when asking that it's difficult to generalize, but he believes it to be closer to the Xbox Series X. In terms of raw computing power, is it closer to the PlayStation 4 or the Xbox Series S? There's a lot of characteristics when it comes to raw computing power, so it's difficult to generalize, but I think it can be thought as closer to the Series S. So straight from a producer that's working on games directly for Switch 2, not necessarily the Digital Foundry comparison, which, you know, they've been on spot on some stuff, way off on others. And not to say that just from, if you take the components, that maybe the power level is somewhat there in a PS4 comparison world. You have to look at the architecture of the chip and also DLSS as a tool that PS4 does not have to run. And that's kind of where my mindset's always been, that PS4 Pro / Series S seems to actually be the level of visual quality that we can get out of the Switch 2, at least at the launch of this generation, because developers are still just learning this hardware for the first time, seeing what kind of hoops they can jump through to actually make some of these projects look and run that much better. And as time goes on, we'll continue to get better and better performance updates for some of the games that are available in the launch window of the Switch 2. That happens on other platforms, that happens on Nintendo's platforms. Like, things are going to get better from here, not worse. And I think whenever you look at comparison screenshots online compared to Series S games and Switch 2 games, they're pretty much in line with each other from a quality standpoint, especially when you're talking about the docked play of Nintendo Switch 2. So I personally, as somebody who's owned the Nintendo Switch 2 since launch now at this point, have been pretty happy with the visual quality of what I've been playing through of the library so far, and we still have a lot of big, more exciting games to come from here. So let me know in the comments down below what you make of all the different stories we talked about today. Do you think that the Splatoon announcement for Splatoon Raiders actually proves there's no June Nintendo Direct, and that's all there is to it? What do you think about the precedent that this sets for Nintendo maybe promoting their franchises by updating their old Switch 1 versions of those games for free, and having potentially a much bigger list of Switch 1 games when it comes to upgrades in the far distant future? And what kind of announcements are you hoping for in terms of new games playable on the Switch 2 now or over the summertime? And where's your hype levels for the next direct presentation once we do finally learn about when Nintendo will hold that? So Make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave, regardless if we agree or disagree. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn your notification bell. And with that, I've been Sunbro, you've been Nation. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.